I think the INR value in terms of $1 would appreciate to rupees 70 by the end of this month.
What? Is it true? I think it's an educated guess by Pitanjali and we should test it.
How do we do that? Is his guess significant? Or is he talking nonsense? We should find out.
Hello friends, this is me Pitanjal.
This is Amusha.
This is Paridi.
And I am Arshia. We all welcome you to a very exciting lecture on hypothesis testing. In this, we will show you how to test the significance of an educated guess, that is hypothesis testing. We hope you enjoy the video.
Let us begin by defining what is a hypothesis test. Hypothesis testing is the theory, methods and practice of testing a hypothesis by comparing it with the null hypothesis. So basically it is an act in statistics using which an analyst tests the assumption of a statement on the population parameter. Now we have introduced you to the term of hypothesis, so it would be apt to define what exactly is meant by a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement or a supposition or proposed explanation made on the basis of limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation. It is thus an educated guess made by a researcher about anything he observes around him. But what is important here is that it needs to be testable either with the help of an experiment or even by an observation. Now for example, I say the weather in Pune would be 23 degrees today. I made an educated guess, and my assumption may be testable through experiment or observation. Can you think of some examples of hypotheses? I am sure you will be able to. Just remember it needs to be an educated guess, and very importantly, it needs to be testable either through experimentation or by observing. Ha! I understand most of you would be having similar questions in mind. Well. Don't worry, we will be telling you that right away. So moving on. So how do we use the concept of hypothesis testing in econometrics? Here you go. So I have the answer here for you. It helps in performing test of significance. A test of significance is a procedure by which sample results are used to verify the truth or falsity of a null hypothesis. Recollect the lectures on beta 2 hat. Beta 2 hat is the slope coefficient of a sample regression function. Now is it significant? How do we test for that? We use hypothesis testing using t-test method for this.
So coming to the very first step, forming the hypothesis. Essentially there will be two hypotheses. Null hypothesis denoted by H0 and alternative hypothesis denoted by H1. A null hypothesis is a type of hypothesis used in statistics that proposes that no statistical significance exists in a set of given observations. The null hypothesis is an assumption made by the researcher, in this case that is beta 2, which is the slope coefficient of the population parameter, is equal to 0. The alternative hypothesis is the hypothesis used in hypothesis testing that is contrary to the null hypothesis. In this case, it would be beta 2 is not equal to 0. Now, using your past knowledge, try and interpret what is the meaning of slope coefficient when it is 0 and when it is not 0. Now, I would like you to pause the video, take a few seconds and make a note of your answer, and then we shall discuss it in the subsequent slides. There are a few concepts associated with hypothesis testing. Firstly, you will come across confidence interval. It is the surety percentage with which we are rejecting the null hypothesis. Statistical significance plays a vital role in statistical hypothesis testing. It is used to determine whether the null hypothesis should be rejected or retained. Alpha is called the significance level, and it is the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis given that it is true. The way you can find significance level is by deducting confidence level from 100 and then dividing it by 100. Alpha, the level of significance or the probability of committing a type 1 error, is thus the probability of rejecting the true hypothesis. Degrees of freedom. Degrees of freedom defines the shape of the distribution. The formula for calculating it is the sample size, that is n minus number of parameters denoted by k. Now calculation of t-statistics. We will now show you how to calculate t-statistic. You will have to use the following formula. T calculated is equal to beta 2 hat minus beta 2 divided by standard error of beta 2 hat. The standard error would be given in the question. Beta 2 is assumed to be 0 as per the null hypothesis. Beta 2 hat would be given in the econometric equation. Don't worry, we will show you in an example at the end. For now, just remember the formula.
Now I will tell you how to calculate t critical value. This is how a t table looks like. From this table, using degrees of freedom and level of significance, we shall be able to calculate t critical value. The critical value depends on both these factors. The level of significance would be given. We can easily find degrees of freedom n minus k and accordingly calculate the t critical value from the t table. N is the sample size and k is the number of parameters. Look at the t table beside. The vertical extreme left column shows the degrees of freedom, the formula for which is n minus k. So the sample size minus the number of parameters would be your degrees of freedom for a particular problem. The horizontal row in the topmost part of the table gives you the level of significance. The level of significance would be given in the question. Find out the degrees of freedom by n minus k. Now go to the corresponding value of level of significance horizontally in the topmost row for two-tailed test. Do note that in econometrics we use a two-tailed test mostly. Consequently, go to the respective value of degree of freedom you find out vertically in the leftmost column bar. Now the number where the two intersects, the degrees of freedom and level of significance is your t critical. The rule for rejecting your null hypothesis is very simple. The rule is if mod of t calculated is greater than t critical, we reject null hypothesis. That means beta 2 is significant, else beta 2 is not significant. So diagrammatically it can be easily explained. You can see the critical values marked. When the t calculated exceeds those points, we reject the null. Concluding remarks on inferences drawn from the hypothesis test. When the mod of t calculated is greater than the t critical, then we reject the null, which was beta 2 is 0. Thus we may say that beta 2 is non-zero if the above condition holds. Beta 2 is thus significant when we reject null hypothesis according to the condition mod of t calculated is greater than t critical. A statistic is said to be statistically significant if the value of the test statistic lies in the critical region. In this case, the null hypothesis is rejected. By the same token, a test is said to be statistically insignificant if the value of the test statistic lies in the acceptance of the region.
Okay, so before we conclude, I would like to show you an example on how to solve questions related to this topic. We would be using Excel. I would recommend you to solve it along with me so that you are more confident with the concepts we just covered. Okay, so the question given to us is as follows. Cm is equal to 263.6416 minus 0.0056 PGNP minus 2.2316 FLR. Now this equation basically tells us that child mortality is inversely dependent on per capita GNP, which is denoted by PGNP, and female literacy rate denoted by FLR. The standard errors given to be are as follows. So it's 11.5932 for beta 1, then 0.0019 for PGNP and 0.2099 for FLR. The sample size, which is n, is given to be 62. The confidence interval is given to be 95%. Now we have to find whether the slope coefficients of PGNP is significant or not. First, how do we go about solving the question? So first, we need to form the hypothesis. Straight away form the hypothesis. So we set the null to be beta 2 equal to 0. The alternate would be beta 2 not equal to 0. Now, we calculate the t calculated value or the t statistic. Recollect the formula which we showed you in this particular lecture. It is nothing but, if you look, we are checking the significance of coefficient of PGNP. So, beta 2 hat, which is 0.0056 minus 0, which is your hypothesis, which beta 2 equal to 0, divided by the standard error of PGNP, so 0.0019. Now after solving, we get that to be 2.947. Now, how do we go about calculating the T critical value? The N is given to be 62, K is given to be 2. So how do we get the degrees of freedom? Remember the formula, it's N minus K, so 62 minus 2 gives you 60. The confidence interval is 95% as given in the question. Now the significance level is nothing but 100 minus the confidence interval divided by 100, which is 0.05. Now degrees of freedom is 60 and level of significance is 0.05. So I've attached a t table here for your reference. So we'll be looking at this particular column and we go down till 60. So we're talking about the value 2, if you see. Yeah. So you can see that this is the value which we're talking about, corresponding to degrees of freedom 60. And of course, it's a two-tailed 0.05, as you can see here. 0.05, which is our significance level. So from here, we get the T critical value, which is coming out to be 2. Now check the condition for rejecting null. We can easily see that our tcal is greater than the tcrit, that is 2.94 is greater than 2, thus we reject null. Thus we may draw the inference that coefficient of PGNP is significant. Thus the slope coefficient associated with per capita GNP given in the question is significant. I'm sure this example has helped you a lot, and I'm sure it will help you prepare for your examinations as well. I'm sure you enjoyed the lecture as well and wish you all the very best. Thank you.